In this video, you're going to learn some quick tips to help you boost your score on RLA fiction passages on the GED test. I'm also going to help you develop some basic fiction skills and strategies for approaching the passages. Then we're going to go through some practice questions, and we're going to take a look at some of the types of questions you can expect on RLA fiction passages for the GED. Now, I first want to note that the key here really is practice. I'm going to give you strategies in this video, but it really does take a lot of practice to make perfect. But that being said, if you are practicing and you are working hard and you're still really struggling, I recommend getting help from maybe a tutor or someone who can help you if you're able to do so. Okay, so let's jump right in here. And I first want to start by giving you some general strategies and tips for approaching these fiction passages on the GED. And the first is what I just call the standard approach, which is to simply read the passage the full way through and then just answer the questions. Now, this can be highly effective, but it can also be time consuming, right? It can take up a lot of time. Now, another approach is the seek and destroy method. So in the seek and destroy method, you don't actually read the full passage word for word. What you do is you go right to the question and you read the question, then you skim the passage until you find where the answer is located. Then you go answer that question and you repeat. Now, I recommend when you do your practicing, when you're taking practice tests or working in a workbook, to try the seek and destroy method at least once or twice, because this can be a really effective method if you find yourself running out of time on the test. But it's not going to work for all questions because some of the questions are designed so that you have to read the passage to answer it. But this is definitely a valid approach to try out. It can also be stressful too for some people. I personally prefer a more standard approach, but I wanted to throw that out there. And as general strategies and tips, right, I want you to focus on first trying to understand the story. Don't worry so much about remembering the details or remembering the facts because you'll have the passage right there on the test. So you can look back at those passages as much as you need to in order to get the right answer. So just try to understand and follow along with the story. And this goes for the RLA section of the GED, but really the whole test. Try not to spend too much time on any one question. Some students like to use the next button to skim the questions before they read the passages. It's up to you if you'd like to do that or not. Some find it helpful, some find it not so helpful. But always guess. Never leave anything blank. So if you're stuck on a question and you're not sure what the answer is, it's a good idea to just mark a guess down, mark the question and come back to it at the end if you have time, but don't leave anything blank because you never know. You might get the question right by guessing. Who knows? So as a general strategy, I want you to focus on what I call the S.C.C.T, the setting, characters, conflict, and theme. And we're going to break these down here. So the reason why I want you to focus on the setting, characters, conflict, and theme, the S.C.C.T, is because it can definitely be hard to take in all of the information at once while you're reading a fiction passage. So by focusing just on these four things as you read, at least at first, it's going to help you understand the information because you're going to be processing the information in the passage in smaller and more manageable chunks. So it's all about giving you the strategy in your head as you're reading. I want you to start asking yourself, what's the setting? Who are the characters? What's the conflict here, and what's the theme? And I'm going to break down how you can do this a little better here. Now, these first two, the setting and the characters, I would say are definitely the most important. So the setting helps you picture where the story is taking place. So the author or the writer of a passage, they want you to know where the story takes place. And it could be maybe, for example, on a farm or in a city. And a story that's set, say, in New York City is going to be a lot different than a story that's set on a farm somewhere out in the Midwest, like Iowa or somewhere like that, right? So it's always important to understand the setting. And if you can keep track of the characters and understand them, which is number 2 on this list, the conflict and the theme are going to be more obvious. So that's why I say the setting and the characters are the first and most important things to cue in on. Now, to figure out the setting, all you have to do is think about where the story is taking place. Now, in a lot of passages, they might come right out and tell you right away, early on, where the story is taking place. All right, but they also might not come right out and say it. So you want to think and look for clues Think about things not just where it's taking place, but also when it's taking place, like the year, the month, the time of day. And also note that if there's lots of older words being used in the story that you're not used to hearing in everyday language, you can probably guess that the story's a bit older. So again, focus on that setting, number one. It might be told to you explicitly, or you might have to dig around and you might have to read between the lines a little bit. And also note that the setting is often going to change throughout the story. So as you read, if the characters are traveling or going somewhere, something to pay attention to because the setting is changing. So that's the setting, and now let's talk about the characters. So having trouble keeping track of the characters is a major reason why test takers struggle with reading comprehension, right? It can be hard to keep track of all the different characters in your head. All right, so for each character that's introduced, I want you to just think about noting the following. For each character, think about what is this person's age. All right, so that's going to tell you, is this person a kid? Is it a teenager? Is it an adult? Also, think about where the person's from. All right, where's that character's hometown? That can be valuable information if it's given to you. All right, and you want to think, is where the person's from, is that the same as the setting of the story? Okay. So also think about the relationship to other characters. Is this character a relative, a friend, an acquaintance, or even an enemy of other characters in the story? And I also want you to think, is the character portrayed as good or bad or neutral? And it might not always be clear at first. A character might seem bad initially, but later turn out to be good. Or a character might seem good initially, but then later turn out to be bad. So definitely just consider, is the character good, bad, or neutral? All right, and I also want you to pay attention to any unique descriptions that the author gives you that you can use to mentally tell that character apart from the other characters. And just generally pay attention to what the person is like. All right, and you might be thinking, how am I going to have time to go through all of this in my head on the test? Well, you're probably not going to have time to write all of this out on the test, but while you're practicing, I recommend just for each character, just go down through this while you're practicing. Think about the age, etc., everything on this list. And I want you to practice because sooner or later you're going to get to the point where you can keep track of the characters in your head a lot better. All right? So when it comes to interpreting fiction, one important skill is making inferences. And you're definitely going to get questions where things aren't told to you straight up and directly. You're going to have to read between the lines. And to make an inference, what you're doing is you're just using common sense and thinking logically, and you're going to make your best guess and you're going to move on. So inferences are educated guesses that you're going to make based off of your own experience and the information in the story. So as a basic skill for the reading comprehension section, you definitely need to be able to make inferences. So don't overthink them, just be logical and then move on. All right, so again, we want to figure out the setting, keep track of those characters, and then the next thing on our list of skills is to figure out the conflict or the problem. All right, and again, the conflict or the problem, that should be pretty clear. If you're paying attention to the characters and you're paying attention to the setting, you just want to note, are there two characters that have a problem with each other? Is there one character who's having some kind of personal problem? But just keep on top of that conflict because whatever the main conflict or problem in the story is, you're probably going to get some questions about it. And if you can figure out the setting and you're keeping track of the characters and you're noting what the major conflict or problem is in the story, then you're really on your way to determining the theme. So what is the theme? Well, the theme is the message that the writer wants to communicate to the reader. And it's usually a general statement about life. It can be stated very directly, or it can also be inferred, meaning you have to kind of read between the lines. All right, and like I said, you'll probably get a question or two about the theme of a passage, and really the key is know the setting, know the characters, know the problem, and just keep in mind that it's just the message that the writer wants you to get. So maybe use process of elimination. If you get a multiple choice question asking you about the theme, just reason your way through it. And if you've followed along with the story and you're understanding the story well, then you should be able to get questions like this right about the theme just by reasoning your way through it. So now let's look at our first practice question. So this is excerpted from a short story called The Yellow Wallpaper, and I'm going to read the passage and we're going to look at some questions here. And the first practice question, just to keep in mind, it's going to be, based on this excerpt here, where does the story take place? So let me read this, and you're more than welcome to pause the video and take your time reading this. If I'm reading too fast or too slowly, you can feel free to adjust the speed of the YouTube video accordingly. But let me start reading here. So it says in the first part, it is very seldom that mere ordinary people like John and myself secure ancestral halls for the summer. A colonial mansion, a hereditary estate, I would say a haunted house, and reach the high of romantic felicity. But that would be asking too much of fate. Still, I will proudly declare that there is something unusual about it. Else why should it be let so cheaply? And why have stood so long unattended? John laughs at me, of course, but one expects that in marriage. John is practical to the extreme. He has no patience with faith, an intense horror of superstition, and he scoffs openly at any talk of things not to be felt and seen and put down in figures. John is a physician, and perhaps, I would not want to say it to a living soul, of course, but this is dead paper and a great relief to my mind. Perhaps that is one reason I do not get well faster. Okay, so again, based on the excerpt, where does the story take place? And as always, you can pause the video, you can read this right off the screen and take your time with it. But I want you to try to answer that question based off of the passage. So the answer here is that the story is taking place in the excerpt. It's taking place in a mansion or a house, right? And we see in the story where it's told that people like John and myself secure ancestral halls for the summer. The word hall could mean like a hallway in a house, but back in older times, it was common to refer to an entire house or an entire building as a hall. All right, so it goes on in section 2 to say a colonial mansion, a hereditary estate. Estate is another word for a house. I would say a haunted house, right? So these words that I've highlighted are kind of your cues to understand that the story is taking place in a mansion or a house. Okay, so the next question is, which statement can the reader infer about John? A, he was nervous about moving into the mansion. B, he grew up in a large family. C, he behaves as if he knows everything. Or D, he is a good listener. So as always, you can pause the video, take your time, and I want you to try to get the right answer to this question. Okay, so let's go over this. So the correct answer is C. He behaves as if he knows everything. Now here are some clues to that, right? So we're told, John laughs at me, of course, but one expects that in marriage. John is practical to the extreme. And it goes on to say that he doesn't have any patience with having faith or in any kind of superstitions, and anything that can't be felt and seen and put down in figures, all right? So the best answer to this question would be C. He behaves as if he knows everything, all right? And a lot of these questions can be dealt with just by process of elimination, right? We certainly are not told that John is nervous about moving into the mansion. In fact, it seems like it's his wife that is the nervous one. And it doesn't mention that he grew up in a large family. And he also certainly doesn't seem to be a good listener here in the excerpt, so C would be the correct answer. Okay, so another question here, and this one's not multiple choice. I'd just like you to think about it and try to put it in your own words. What do you think is the conflict in this excerpt? In other words, how would you describe the conflict in this excerpt? So hopefully you had time to think about it. And there's not really a right or wrong answer, but this is just what I came up with here. So basically, here's the conflict, basically, as I see it. It's that John and his wife, who's the narrator or the person telling the story, they're moving into a haunted house. It's a new house. And the narrator is concerned that it might be haunted, or she's just generally creeped out by the house. But John, her husband, doesn't seem to be taking it seriously. And the narrator has trouble expressing her true feelings to John. So again, that's the conflict as I see it here. You might have came up with something different, but hopefully you got something similar to what I did. I just wanted you to think about what the conflict is. There's not really a right or wrong answer, just hopefully we came up with something similar here. Okay, so now we're moving on to a new story. It's The Bride Comes to Yellow Sky. And let me read it here, and as always, you can pause the video, read as fast or as slowly as you'd like to. But it starts off by saying, "The great Pullman was whirling onward with such dignity of motion that a glance from the window seemed simply to prove that the plains of Texas were pouring eastward. Vast flats of green grass, dull-hued spaces of mesquite and cactus, little groups of frame houses, woods of light and tender trees, all were sweeping into the east, sweeping over the horizon, a precipice." So the question that I want you to answer first is, based on the excerpt, where does the story take place? So pause the video, and I want you to try to answer this. Alright, so the story is taking place in Texas. It's told to us pretty early on in the passage, as I've highlighted here, so hopefully that makes sense. Alright, if you've stuck with me so far, then give yourself a pat on the back, because this is hard work. It's not easy, it's not fun, it's not necessarily entertaining for you, but I hope this is going to pay off, and I hope that you're seeing that this is going to pay off for you. And let's tackle another passage right now. This one is excerpted from the Copper Beeches. So as always, I'm going to read it first, and I want you to follow along, and of course pause the video, read it on your own if you'd like to. But let me start it off here for us, and then we'll go to some questions. So it starts off by saying, "To the man who loves art for its own sake," remarked Sherlock Holmes, tossing aside the advertisement sheet of the Daily Telegraph, "it is frequently in its least important and lowliest manifestations that the keenest pleasure is to be derived. It is pleasant to me to observe, Watson, that you have so far grasped the truth that in these little records to our cases, which you have been good enough to draw up, and I am bound to say, occasionally to embellish, you have given prominence not so much to the many causes, celebres, and sensational trials in which I have figured out, but rather to those incidents which may have been trivial in themselves, but which have given room for those faculties of deduction and of logical synthesis which I have made my special province. And yet," said I, smiling, "I cannot quite hold myself absolved from the charge of sensationalism which has been urged against my records." "You have erred, perhaps," he observed, taking up a glowing cinder with the tongs and lighting with it the long cherry wood pipe, which was wont to replace his clay when he was in a disputatious rather than a meditative mood. "You have erred, perhaps, in attempting to put color and life into each of your statements, instead of confining yourself to the task of placing upon record that sever reasoning from cause to effect, which is really the only notable feature about the thing." It goes on to say, "It seems to me that I have done you full justice in the matter," I remarked with some coldness, "for I was repelled by the egotism which I had more than once observed to be a strong factor in my friend's singular character." "No, it is not selfishness or conceit," said he, answering, as was his wont, "my thoughts rather than my words. If I claim full justice for my art, it is because it is an impersonal thing, a thing beyond myself. Crime is common, logic is rare. Therefore it is upon the logic rather than upon the crime that you should dwell. You have degraded what should have been a course of lectures into a series of tales. It was a cold morning of the early spring, and we sat after breakfast on either side of a cherry fire in the old room at Baker Street. A thick fog rolled down between the lines of dun-colored houses, and the opposing windows loomed like dark, shapeless blurs through the heavy yellow wreaths. Our gas was lit and shone on the white cloth and glimmer of china and metal, for the table had not been cleared yet." Okay, so I first want to say thank you for sticking with me through that passage. I know that's a little bit harder of a passage. It's so hard actually that some of the words I had a little trouble pronouncing there, because some of these words are not words you hear very often, but thank you for sticking with me. And the first question I'd like you to think about is, based on the excerpt, where does the story take place? So feel free to pause the video, go back a little bit, scroll back on the video, and look for the part in the passage where it tells you where the story takes place. Or if you are following along and you remember it, that's even better. So let me reveal the answer. It's Baker Street, morning, early spring, right? And it's told to us in line 7 that it was a cold morning of the early spring, and we sat after breakfast on either side of a cherry fire in the old room at Baker Street. Now, I wanted to use this example because I wanted you to see that sometimes the author, the writer, the person who's writing the passage is going to go on and on and on and give you all these details and all this information, but then later on in the passage will be the setting. So the setting might be given to you in the first paragraph, as we saw in one of the earlier examples in the video, but the setting also might be buried later on in the story. So just note that if you don't see it right away, keep your eyes out for it. Okay. So now the next question here is, which character smokes the long cherry wood pipe? And I put the text on the screen that you need to answer this question. So it's either, there's only 2 characters, there's Sherlock Holmes and there's Watson. So I'd like you to pause the video, reread this if you need to, and I want you to tell me which character is smoking the long cherry wood pipe. So the correct answer is A, Sherlock Holmes. So what you need to see here is that first, Sherlock Holmes is talking. And he names the person that he's talking to as Watson, right? So here in the first line here, right, it says, "To the man who loves art for its own sake, comma, remarked Sherlock Holmes," which tells us that the person that's talking is Sherlock Holmes. Then he goes on to say, "It is pleasant to me to observe, comma, Watson." So Sherlock Holmes is talking, and who's he talking to? It's Watson. So that's the first thing I want you to see, all right? In line 2, where it says, "I," smiling, we know the narrator, or the person that's telling the story, has to be Watson, all right? Because we know right here again, "And yet," said I, smiling. And who's this person here, said I? Well, we know that it must be Watson, all right? Because at first he says, "Remarked Sherlock Holmes," then he says Watson. So it goes on to say, you have erred perhaps," he observed. And who is he here? Well, he, of course, is Sherlock Holmes. And the sentence goes on to say, "He observed, taking up a glowing cinder with the tongs and lighting it with the long cherry wood pipe." So we know that that's Sherlock Holmes. So hopefully this explanation is clear and makes sense. Again, I know this is kind of a tricky passage here with a lot of old-sounding words, a little harder to pick through, but if you got this right, really good job. And if not, still, give yourself credit for trying and for sticking with me through a harder passage. Okay, so let's shift gears here, and we're going to go now to a passage from an excerpt from The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. So the passage reads, "Tom, no answer. Tom, no answer. What's gone with that boy, I wonder? You, Tom, no answer." The old lady pulled her spectacles down and looked over them about the room. Then she put them up and looked out under them. She seldom or never looked through them for so small a thing as a boy. They were her state pair, the pride of her heart, and were built for style, not service. She could have seen through a pair of stove lids just as well. So your question here is, based on the excerpt, which of the following would the old lady value the most when shopping for a new car? A, getting the best deal on her purchase. B, how well the car will drive in the snow. C, what the neighbors will think of the car. Or D, fuel efficiency. So as always, you can pause the video, reread the text that's right on the screen for you, and try to get the right answer here. So let's go over it. So the answer here is C. The thing that she would most care about when shopping for a car would be C, what the neighbors think of the car. So this is kind of an inference question here, right? So we're not told anything in the story about what kind of car this lady would buy. We're just making an educated guess based off of what we know about the lady and her character, right? So we're told here that it's talking about her spectacles, which her spectacles or her glasses, whatever you want to call them. It's a pair of spectacles that she's wearing, and it tells us that they were built for style, and she could have seen through a pair of stove lids just as well, meaning she's wearing the glasses just for the look, just for the pride that she gets from wearing them. It has nothing to do with the actual functional value of the glasses, right? So we can conclude, or we can infer, that what the neighbors will think of the car would be the thing that she would care about most. Okay, so now here's a little, and the video is not done yet. I'm just going to give you, right before we go into looking at some of the other types of questions that you might get and some of the other strategies for fiction passages on the RLA section of the GED, I want to give you a practice exercise, and I realize that most people watching this video are not going to actually take the time to do this, and that's okay. It's up to you. But I really recommend for those who really want to get a good score and really want to help with your reading comprehension, I want you to get a short story to read, and I'll put some of my favorite short stories down below, some links to get them for free. You can just click one of those links and read the story. You can Google free short stories and find some on your own, or if you have a book of short stories or something, whatever you want to do. But my challenge would be to get a short story. Again, I'll put a link to some free ones down below where you can Google free short stories, whatever. But I want you to read, and I want you to write or type what the setting is, and note any changes in the setting as you go. Then every time a character is introduced, I want you to jot down who that character is and list any given information about that character, such as their age, their hometown, anything about their relationship to other characters, and is that character good, bad, or neutral, and anything else unique about that character. And then I also want you to write down the conflict in the story, then how that conflict is resolved at the end. Okay? And I'd like you to get 2 to 3 short stories for free that you find on the internet or wherever, and go through them and go through this practice method, just step 1, step 2, and step 3. And I think that after you do this 2 or 3 times for 2 or 3 short stories, you're going to start to internalize the process, and you're going to be able to start doing it more automatically in your head. Like I said, this is going to take a little time, it's going to take a little work, but you know, if you can't afford a GED practice book, or you're having trouble affording practice tests or whatever, this is a free way to practice. Just find some short stories for free on the internet and just go through these 3 steps. Get out a sheet of paper or open a Word document. Just write these things out. Do it a couple times, and I really think it's going to help you. All right. So that being said, now let me give you some of the other types of questions that you might get regarding fiction passages on the test. Now note that nobody can predict exactly which types of questions you're going to get. So just keep that in mind, that there's no guarantee here. And I can't cover every possible type of question here, right? But, you know, again, as always, focus on the setting, the characters, the conflict, and the theme. The rest should fall into place much more easily, all right? So one type of question that you're bound to get is to select the correct order of events in a passage, all right? And so the seek and destroy method that I talked about earlier in the video for reading, where you just read the question and then go skim through the passage to find the answers, these correct order of events questions are really put in there, I think, in part to stop people from doing the seek and destroy method, all right? Like I said, some of the questions you have to read the passage to answer, and unfortunately, if you get a question that says select the correct order of events, you're going to have to read the full passage, or at least enough of it to answer the question, all right? But the key here really is to just focus on what's happening as you read, go back and check the passage, and if you want to, just put down some bullet points as you read to help you follow the events. All right, so another type of question you might get is which adjectives best describe a character? And adjectives are just words that are used to describe nouns, like smooth, soft, rough, etc. All right, so to get these questions right, just pay close attention to who the characters are in the story and the interactions that they're having with the characters and generally what they do. Okay, so you also might get point of view types of questions that ask you about the point of view. So what you need to really know is that the first person point of view is going to use the word I. So if the writer of the passage writes, I walked up the stairs, note that that's the first person point of view. So my name is Parker, by the way. It's a little late in the video to introduce myself, but that's my name. And if I were to write Parker walked up the stairs, you would know that I'm writing in the third person point of view. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it was helpful. There's other videos that I've made to help you pass the GED. One of them involves the other types of questions that you'll get on the RLA section, so you can check that out next, or check out another video on my channel. Good luck and thank you for watching.